My name's Adele Onyango, and welcome to another episode of Legally Clueless. No, seriously, I have no clue what I'm doing, but I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one. Thank you so much for rocking with this podcast. It's absolutely amazing to have you being part of the family. If you're just discovering us this year, welcome. It's never too late to join in. Episodes like this go out every single Monday, and you can officially join our family on our website. That's legallycluelessafrica.com. I am behind on sending you this year's newsletter, but I think I'm just like 2 days behind. So it's coming. I promise. Just sign up quick and fast. A link to our website is in the show notes, as well as links to our social media platforms. And if you want to share your very valid African story with us, there's a link to a storyteller form in the show notes. All right. So I don't want to speak too much because, the story in this episode is fantastic. Listen to this.
Alcohol was the great sort of leveler of my social skills. You know, it made it easy for me to interact with people. It made it easy for me to be social and fun. You were leaving an anxiety-filled home to go to a school where I was being bullied, and then go back to a home where there was abuse, and then go back to school where I was being bullied, and go back home where there was abuse. So it was this like sort of vicious cycle of never feeling at peace or at ease. And then I came to Kenya in 2000 for a holiday. I met the then owner of Capital FM, and she said to me, "You've got a nice voice. Come and do a voice test." And I said, "Okay." So I went to Londra House in town, and remember walking in and thinking, "Wow, this place is cool, man." That Capital, it's not the same now. It's kind of a dead entity now, to be honest. But there was a buzz, there was a vibe. I mean, if you remember Capital in those days, there was an energy to Capital. It was so cool. But I remember going to my first group therapy session on my first day there and seeing all these grown men in the room crying. And I was like, there is no fucking way that's going to be me. By day 3, they could not stop me from crying.
This is Kenyan radio royalty on this episode, to be honest. Farid Khimani's story is coming up in a bit. In case you are not from Kenya, he has for decades ruled the airwaves and been such a force when it comes to broadcast media here. And I just, honestly, when I was listening to this story, either I'm in a very emotional state in my life or point in my life, but I had balancing tears. And it wasn't tears of sorrow or anything. I just felt such an overwhelming sense of joy for someone. My life challenges have been slightly different from his in terms of addiction. That is not something I've experienced. But when he spoke of addiction being a symptom of trauma I can relate with. God damn it. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I wanted to cry tears of joy because I'm so happy for the awakening he's experienced and that he so openly allowed himself to be vulnerable with us. That is such a gift. It's coming up in a bit. First, Happy New Year. I hope your new year has started really well. Mine definitely has. I think this was the best Christmas and New Year's I've had in a long time. I scheduled a lot of solo days where I just did nothing and rested. Like, my doctor is so proud of me because that's something I struggle with. Guilt-free, proper rest. It wasn't like I was taking the time resting to be strategizing. I finished my strategy beginning of December, and I hired more team members to help me with that. And so I could really rest. So if there's one thing I can wish for you this year, actually, it's 2 things. Solitude and courage. I feel like those 2 things will help you navigate your trauma and lead you to like a calming clarity that I'm so thankful I have. Let's jump into Farid before I start crying, right? Cool? Are we together? As I mentioned, this is Kenyan radio royalty. But even more than that, I just feel like so many gems in his story. It's just so fascinating how he just drops them like there. It's casually, yeah? But I was like, wow, that makes so much sense. Wow, this makes so much sense. And so I hope this story starts your year off with some harsh truths, but truths nonetheless that you will need when you're navigating healing this year, even if it's not healing or recovering from addiction. 100 African stories on Legally Clueless. Stories from Africa.
My name is Farid Khimani. I've been in this world of media for 25 years, so that's exactly half my life. So I was born in the UK. I think we left in 1983 and moved to the US. So I was born in Devon in the UK, in the hospital in Exeter, and then moved to the US when I was 8 to a town in North Florida called St. Augustine, and went to junior high school, and the one before junior high. I don't know what they call it there, in like Catholic school system, because it was North Florida is part of the Bible Belt in the US. So that's like Florida, Georgia, Alabama. And then sort of did all my schooling there until 18 and then moved to Jacksonville, Florida, which is 30 minutes north of St. Augustine for university. I picked Jacksonville because it's on the beach. And did my degree there in journalism with a minor in marketing and religion. So my major was journalism, my minor was marketing, and I got a second minor in religion, world religion. My mom was Kenyan. My father was born in Tanzania. So we are East African by blood, but obviously Indian by heritage and ancestry. And I used to, fly in and out of the States and come visit my parents. They moved back to Kenya in 1993. 93? Gosh, it's only 10 years in the US. Wow, now that I think about it, that doesn't seem very long at all. But yeah, 10 years in the US. So I was traveling in and out. I finished university in 1998 and then moved to Atlanta, Georgia, because I wanted to be a bartender for the rest of my life. And I got a job at a really cool bar called the Rock Bottom Brewery, which was just at the beginning of the party district of Atlanta, with the area is called Buckhead. It's where all the clubs and bars and strip clubs, and it's like the whole mile or a couple of miles of places to party. And I guess, for me, before I got into media, I was already sort of experimenting with drugs and alcohol in university, but really recreationally. But when I say recreationally, I was using them a lot. I did everything under the sun: ecstasy, weed, LSD, mushrooms, you name it. Did it all, and just like my circle of friends, it was very much common, and we just kind of managed to get all of our work done, schoolwork done, and I managed to get to work, and I never really had a problem sort of functioning in my active addiction. I started drinking when I was about 12 or 13, sort of raiding my dad's liquor cabinet, a bar at home, just trying things. It was usually like spirits and beer. Like most kids, I think, in that have access to alcohol will try. I didn't really like alcohol, actually, when I was in high school. I hardly drank, to be honest. And when I went to university, I started to drink and started to get drunk. And I realized that alcohol was the great sort of leveler of my social skills. It made it easy for me to interact with people. It made it easy for me to be kind of social and fun. So I thought. I was thinking, this is why people drink, it's to loosen you up. And, I was quite I came from a pretty tough home. So I guess the escape was there, and I felt good when I was drinking. I remember that. I don't remember when I first had a drink or when I first smoked weed, because those are the first two I tried. But I do remember feeling whole, not sort of broken or fragmented, which is how I felt normally. You know what I mean? Well, I saw a lot of abuse at home. A lot, and a lot of shouting, a lot of anxiety, a lot of tension. It's hard to say with both parents being, having passed, that they were very unhappy with each other. And obviously, as if you're a child in that environment, then it will sort of trickle down to you as a child. And children absorb a lot. As a father of two young boys, I know how much they can absorb, So I witnessed a lot of violent emotional and violent physical abuse when I was growing up. So, if you compound that with the fact that I was one of the only Indian kids in all white schools, so you would almost say you were leaving an anxiety-filled home to go to a school where I was being bullied, and then go back to a home where there was abuse, and then go back to school where I was being bullied, and go back home where there was abuse. So it was this like sort of vicious cycle of never feeling at peace or at ease, you know? So when I discovered alcohol, it was like I could escape from whatever kind of internal or emotional pain I was feeling. And I think that's, you know, I mean, truthfully, if you look at addiction in all its causes, because I have 2 certifications in addiction counseling, and I deal in the addiction space quite heavily now from the side of someone with lived experience. Trauma is the key indicator of addiction. So addiction is not the problem. Addiction is a symptom of a much bigger problem. The substances are not the problem. I can't take, if you're an addict, for example, I can't take you and say, I'm going to cure your addiction. I have to get to the root of why you drink or why you use. And you know, 73% of addiction cases are rooted in trauma, and it's probably higher actually, but I think that's the global percentage. So I dealt with a lot of trauma, and that's how I covered it up in the beginning. But, you know, I didn't know that's why. I just thought, wow, feels good, and, you know, I'm going to keep doing this, and got to college, and parents moved back to Kenya, and I was kind of left on my own. I didn't have any money. So I was working 2 jobs to get my degree. You know, Christmases I was spending alone because my family was here. I lived in my car for a spell as well because I couldn't afford the housing at the university or the summertime period. So it was a lot. But again, I didn't realize at the time why I needed to use alcohol and drugs. I had no idea. I just knew I needed to use them. But it wasn't like I was like, I'm taking these substances so I don't have to think about these things. It's just easier, you know? And look, I'm not the only case in the world that's like this. You know, this is normal for addicts. It's a normal sort of trajectory. You've been through some shit, and therefore you deal with it by escaping, which is, in addiction, is alcohol, drugs, gambling, sex. You know, to a lesser degree, and not nearly as detrimental to your life, gym, or exercise, work, whatever. There are so many different addictive routes you can take. I just chose mine to be alcohol and drugs, you know, which would later manifest into sex, which I'll get to in a few minutes as well. So when I got to university, I experimented a lot, and then I got this job in Atlanta when I graduated. That's when I discovered cocaine. I was working 6 p.m. to 4 a.m. 3 nights a week behind a bar. You know, I was pretty cool shit, to be honest. You know, we were a flare boss, or bottle spinning and all that, you know. A very good mixologist. I was, you know, one of the best in the city, and Atlanta being a big city, you know, people used to come to our bar to see us work because it was like a show almost, you know. And I was really tired one night. One of my colleagues said, you know, come to the bathroom, and took out a pen cap and dipped it in a white powder, and I put it up to my nose, and I took a little bit, and I was like, wow, I'm going to do this shit for the rest of my life. Those were my exact words. But I still remember that conversation. His name was Dimitri. And that was it. That was my journey into cocaine, you know, which, you know, when I came, that was in 1998 and 99, those 2 years was quite heavy use of cocaine. Now, every addict goes through what we call a rock bottom, and I was working at Rock Bottom Brewery, so there's a whole correlation between the two, you know? And then I came to Kenya in 2000 for a holiday, and I met the then owner of Capital FM. Her name was Linda Holt. And she said to me, you've got a nice voice. Come and do a voice test. And I said, okay. So I went to Londra House in town, and remember walking in and thinking, wow, this place is cool, man. The Capital, it's not the same now. It's kind of a dead entity now, to be honest. But there was a buzz, there was a vibe. I mean, if you remember Capital in those days, there was an energy to Capital. It was so cool, you know. And if you worked for Capital, you were like, oh man, like you'd made it, you know. And I didn't have any ropes to climb. It was just like, we love your voice. Start doing the sports. And that's what I did in 2000. And Sean Carnavillis, if you remember him, he was away at the Olympics in Sydney. So I was filling in for him. But then the banter between me and the morning show host, the morning show host was a guy called Dusty Rhodes. The banter became so natural that they were like, we want you to co-host the morning show. Within like 2 weeks of me doing radio, I was now hosting what was then one of the biggest breakfast shows in the country. I think the only bigger one would have been Caroline Motoko at Kiss FM at the time. And my career just blew up overnight. I was like at overnight success. You know what I mean? That's really how you kind of look at it. And, you know, I would go places and people knew who I was, and I never had to buy drinks. And then you start getting invited to the parties and where the drugs are. And, you know, so my addiction in the US was to function in an environment that was very long hours and late nights. I never used cocaine in the US to party. I used it to stay alert and awake because I was obviously burning my body out by drinking too much and working long hours in a bar and weird hours. And, I still remember at the bar, Rock Bottom Brewery, we would finish at 4 and then, at 2, sorry, the bar closed at 2. And then you have the next 2 hours, you're cleaning the bar for the next day, right? But we would literally from 2 to 4 be cleaning and drinking and using. And that was 3 nights a week. But I never really thought of it as a party drug, cocaine. I thought of it as I needed to function. And this is why people on Wall Street do it. And this is why high level lawyers do it. It's to stay awake and alert and blah, blah, blah. When I got here and started doing radio and didn't have those crazy hours, I worked 4 hours a day, 6 to 10, you know what I mean? It's when I was like, wow, this drug can be kind of fun too, So I started using, and it was really quite recreationally. It wasn't out of control, but I was still drinking almost every day and the lifestyle was getting out of control. Now, one thing about me that I have to make very clear, and this is not the same for all addicts, so I would never want anyone to say, they can use drugs and alcohol excessively and function, but I could, and I can. And that's a very dangerous place. I never got fired from a job, never missed a day of work, no matter how fucked up I was the night before, So I managed somehow. Absolutely, I've been to work drunk. I've been to work and used cocaine. I mean, I've done it all, you know what I mean? I've done it all, and no one knew, no one knew until they did, by the way. And then that permeated into relationships where I was dishonest and I was cheating and I was lying, to a degree, just what I've learned about myself, and I'll come back to my story in a moment, and it's really important that I put this out there, is active addiction is the place where you lie to yourself. And in lying to yourself, if you can't be accountable to yourself, you can't be accountable to anyone else. So lies become normal, dishonesty becomes normal, cheating becomes normal, shouting becomes normal. And I grew up in that environment, right? I saw it from my dad. And my whole life, I would tell myself, I'm never going to end up like him. I'm never going to turn out like my dad. And really, that's the path I was on, right? So that continued, man, like 2020, 2005, 6, a lot of really broken relationships, a lot of, hurting people along the way, a lot of family breakdowns with my mom's side of the family, a lot of them are based here. And then I got married to Leia in 2006, and then hid my addiction for another 11 years. So cocaine became my drug. I lost a lot of weight. I didn't eat. I was not present in the marriage. Got clean for a year, had a son. The one thing I will say about me is my sons are my life. And I was always a great dad, but I was an absolutely rotten husband. And I can say that now because I've learned a lot about myself. And if I could sit here and be very dishonest with you and tell you I was a great husband, but then, I'm not going to help people this way, So I cheated, I lied, all the things that you do in active addiction, but I was always there for my 2 boys, especially my oldest, because I spent his first 5 years, they were here. And I'll get to that part of my story in a minute. Anyway, long story short, I started feeling the walls closing in. Some of my friends were trying to get clean, some of my using friends, and obviously would never name names, but there was a group of us, and some of them were trying to get clean. Some of their wives found out that they were using drugs, cocaine especially. My wife would then tell me, if we go out for lunch with family or friends, please don't drink, because I was getting to the point where I would drink myself into would be sitting at a table with 8 friends and I'm slurring before we even had a starter. You know what I mean? I started going to restaurants early so I could drink before anyone else got there. Then pay that bill because I knew that my wife was going to watch my intake when everyone was at the lunch, right? So I would go early. I think my wife at the time, without getting too intimate with the details of our relationship, wanted to have children, but there were some conditions, obviously. And one of them was I had to sort of change who I was in a way, which was the right advice, even though it didn't work because I immediately went back to drinking. So, she would say, don't drink at lunch. So I would get places early and drink. So before you and I were going for lunch with a group of friends, you would tell me, let's meet at 1. I'd be at the restaurant at 11:30, have a couple of beers, a couple of whiskeys, pay the bill, tell the waiter, when you come back, don't ask me if I want more. Ask me like you're asking me you're offering me a first drink, right? And to be honest with you, I saw nothing wrong with this behavior, by the way. Nothing at all. There was, in my mind, it was perfectly normal, right? I justified it in my fucking head that this is how people live life, okay? But the world was getting grayer and more colorless, and I was getting, more unhappy with who I was. Physically, I've always been, up until my addiction, I was always a good-looking, athletic guy. And then I could see the sort of decomposition of my physical self, right? Looking in the mirror, that circles under my eyes, teeth were yellow, my skin was gray, my eyes were yellow. You know what I mean? I could see it. But it didn't stop me, and I would tell myself, okay, next week I'm not going to drink, and then that would be usually when I had a hangover, and then by Tuesday when I felt better, straight back to it, right? So obviously that was a problem. I remember one instance going for lunch with my wife and some friends and our kids, and my wife said, "Please don't drink at this lunch." So I said, "I won't, don't worry," thinking try to convince her that I had it all under control. But I put a bottle of whiskey in the boot of the car, and I would say, "I'm going to the bathroom," and go to the car and take a couple of shots just if I could loosen myself up, But I just didn't like being around people when I was sober. So when all this sort of started falling apart and people started to, go away for help or admit that they had a problem, people in my circles, I knew that it was coming. So I started doing outpatient counseling here on Raptor Road with a lady, a beautiful, beautiful woman. When I say beautiful, just a great human being called Pat, who's passed away recently. Twice a week, 8,000 shillings a session, by the way. And I'd sit with her for an hour, in all honesty, tell her, yeah, I'm done. I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to use anymore. And then sometimes from her, I'd go straight to Kengeles and start drinking. So I started to realize at that point that I could not do this on my own, that I had a problem. So one night, my wife asked me if we could have a conversation. She asked me to be honest, and I opened up and said everything. I'm using drugs. I drink every day. I have a problem. I need help. And a week later, I was on a plane to South Africa to rehab. And even then, on the plane ride to rehab, I was kind of thinking, let me just go for 28 days, which is the minimum. And then I'll come back. I'll tick all the boxes. I'll come back and I'll figure out how I can drink in moderation like normal people. When I got to rehab, one of the first things they said to me was, "I hope you're prepared to never drink again." And I was like, what the that's not why I'm here. I want to learn how to drink like a normal person, like responsibly. And they were like, "No, that you're an addict. That doesn't work." So I was like, okay, well, then I'm just going to sit here. And by the way, that 28 days, which turned into 35 days, cost around $15,000. Okay. So it's not cheap. Even then, I thought to myself, I'm just going to sit here and just tick all the boxes so I can go home. And I'm always going to drink and use. I'm just going to figure out how to do it normally. So I flew Kenya Airways to Johannesburg and then from Joburg to Cape Town. And I got absolutely drunk on the flight and then almost missed my connection to Cape Town, where I was in treatment. I was the treatment center was called Bloemendal Addiction Treatment Center, and it's just outside Stellenbosch in a place called Paarl. And I got there and, the first thing that happened was you get to the treatment center. It's about an hour from the airport, hour and a half, I can't remember anyway. And I met this big Muslim guy by the name of Anwar. And he's like, "All right, cool, come with me." Took me to my room and I saw 4 beds. So I was like, oh, I'm sharing a room with 3 other guys, I was like, I can't do this. And then he's like, "Right, let's go." So he took every piece of clothing out of my bag and went through the pockets of all my pants and all the rolled up socks to make sure I wasn't carrying anything with me, all my shoes under the soles. And then he looks at me, he goes, "Right, take your clothes off because we need to go through the clothes you're wearing." So jeans and my t-shirt, and went through everything and then said, "Okay, right, you're good. You don't have anything on you. All right, so give me your phone, your laptop, and unpack and give me your suitcase." And they sit with you through this process. So I unpacked my bag, took my stuff, and then the next day I had a physical with the doctor because I got in at night. And she looked at me without even one test, without even touching me once, and said, "You would have had 3 months left to live. If you hadn't come here, you'd be dead in 3 months." Just by looking at me. No blood test, no urine test, no heart test, nothing. She just looked at me and said, "You will be dead in 3 months if you're not here." And I didn't know my body was failing. I had no idea. So they gave me 4 Valium the first night I was there. Valium is, I don't know if you know what Valium is. It's, what do you call this? It makes you sleepy and drowsy. And I refused to take it. I was like, I'm not taking drugs to get off drugs. So, and funny enough, I had no physical withdrawals. I slept like a baby from day one. And I left the 4 Valium there next to my bed when I left the rehab. But I remember walking into my first section. So basically how it is there's individual therapy, group therapy, there's exercise, there's healthy eating, you go horse riding, there's a pool, You go for mindful morning walks. You go to AA and Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous and Gambling Anonymous and Sex and Love Anonymous meetings, every day. It's pretty full on. But I remember going to my first group therapy session on my first day there and seeing all these grown men in the room crying. And I was like, there is no fucking way that's going to be me. No chance. And I hadn't shed a tear in about 20 years. I was completely hardened by life. Like, I just did not cry. By day 3, they could not stop me from crying. Like, I wept everything came out. Everything came out. And that's the purge you need, right? Because that's what storing the pain and the sort of the trauma is all stored in this sort of this place that we block. And then the blocking turns into numbing, and the numbing turns into drugs, and the drugs turn into alcohol, and the alcohol turns into sex. And so I just got it all out. But I had a couple of really hard, difficult moments in treatment. The worst was my wife leaving with my kids, which I think you probably know about, but I'll explain it because it's quite a common story that's been online. She left and she's Swiss and moved to Switzerland with my kids. That was tough. Even though we did try to make the relationship work, when I got back, it just didn't, and that's okay. And we're on super terms now, and my kids are doing great. Yannick is 11 and Noah is 7. I go in and out 6-7 times a year. I just took my partner, the woman that I'm with, to meet my ex-wife and my kids last month. So it's really been a beautiful progression of growth. I've had a few relapses along the way as well, so I would never lie and say I haven't, because this is not an easy journey at all for an addict. It's difficult, and it comes with its own challenges. But what happened to me in between 2018, when I got out, which is the 7th of April, to really about 2 years ago, and really truly more like a year, was in recovery they call it white knuckling it, and white knuckling it means you are sober, but you're not recovering, because there's 2 elements to recovery. Sobriety is not the answer. Yeah. You can be sober, but you can be the same asshole you were when you were using, which is what happened to me from 2018 to 2022. 2021, thereabouts, right? I was sober for the most part, but I was just not recovering. I was still the same person, dishonest, lying, cheating, all of that stuff. And I took it out on partners that I was with, women that I dated. And then the cheating became more and more and more. So like alcohol and drugs, now it was women, and I was just saying more. And that was my addiction. That became my addiction after I quit the drugs and the alcohol, was sex. Which is, if with drugs and alcohol, you're fucking up your life. When you're in a sex and love addiction, you are destroying other people's lives as well, right? Because there's always someone on the other end of it, right? So, and I saw nothing wrong with that. My justification to myself was that I'm sober. What's the problem? And then around 2021, I started to become more active in recovery, reading a lot of literature, going to meetings, reaching out to a sponsor, and doing this kind of stuff, talking to people about recovery, and got 2 certifications in addiction counseling as well. And that's when my entire outlook on life changed. That's when I realized that sobriety is so easy. Recovery is the hard bit. But you think about it, I was in active addiction for 23 years. So how am I supposed to rewire my brain in such a short amount of time, which is what I do now. And that's really where I am now. My mother passed away in 2022. My last relapse was the day we buried her, which was the 19th of March, 2022. And I went to a bar with a friend after we buried my mom, and I drank 2 bottles of wine. And that was a Saturday. And on Sunday, I went into an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting, and I shared that I'd relapsed, and but the basis of my relapse was that my mom died and we had to bury her. Because, in our faith, we bury in 24 hours. She died on a Friday. Saturday morning, she was put in the ground. Most people sort of commiserated with me, Oh, before I get to that. But I also shared in that share that I have gratitude, and everyone's like, how can you have gratitude in such a shitty time? And I said, because my mom got me clean for 3 years. Like, she saw who I was intentioned to be when I was born. She'd never seen that person before. But then everyone commiserated with me and sort of patted me on the back and said, we understand that you had to drink because your mother passed away. But there was one person, and I feel like I should call him by first name because his words have stuck with me and kept me sober for the last 2+ years. His name's Neil. As I was leaving the meeting, I said to him, he's like, I haven't seen you in a while. How you been? I said, well, my mom died. So I relapsed, but it's a good enough reason. And he looked me in the eyes and he said, there's never a good reason. And that was that was like so honest, you know? And I was just like, yeah, you're right. Like I could have totally gone through that without drinking. I just chose the easy way out. And that's what I mean about it's so hard for us. You know, you might drink as you, and it may be once a week, every 2 weeks, twice a week, whatever it is. But if you have shit to do today and tomorrow, you're probably not going to go and sit in a bar and drink or buy a bottle of whiskey and drink, right? See, I don't have that function in my in my psyche. I don't have it. I can have a million things I need to finish tomorrow, but I'll find a million reasons why I should drink tonight. So when I got to rehab and they said you can never drink again, as much as that didn't sit well with me, I totally understand it now. I can never drink again. I can never use again. I can never cheat, have sex with someone that I don't love again. But I could for so long and think nothing of it, to be honest. So, you know, I met someone about a year and a half ago who is incredible. And I'm really blessed that I have this person in my life. And, you know, I've thought I've been in love before, but I think this is the purest I've been in a relationship. The most authentically me I've been in a relationship. So possibly the other ones were not necessarily love, even though maybe I thought they were. But I wasn't ready to be in that space anyway. I was still ready to be in a space of deceit and dishonesty and mistrust and drugs and alcohol and sex. You know, and I've actually never gone on record to admit that I'm a sex and love addict. This is the first time I'm doing that because we learn about ourselves as we go. So probably timeliness that this happened now because I did not identify as that for a very long time. But it was so much a part of who I was throughout my using of substances and after. And the sex and love side of it was magnified after I removed the drugs and the alcohol because I needed something. But I saw nothing wrong with it because I wasn't using drugs and alcohol. So what's the problem? And I have damaged and hurt people along the way that, you know, I don't think I'll ever get forgiveness for, or at least not now. Because I needed to numb something. And sex was the answer when I took cocaine and booze out of the equation. The last 6 months to 8 months of my using and drinking, I did alone. Because I was so embarrassed of how much I consumed. And people were already being like, dude, you need to slow down. So I would do it alone. You know, so the clubs and the bars ended before I got clean. But, so I've discovered that so I love to work, and you know, I think part of the reason I managed to maintain a career through all of this active addiction is because I genuinely love my work. So I have a few businesses that I run, plus of course my production house, and I work also for a company in New York called Border Nation as their creative director for Africa. So I'm quite busy on the work front. I do CrossFit, which is like, a friend of mine was telling me today that CrossFit is my new drug. But you could have worse addictions, I suppose. I love it. I love the intensity and how difficult it is. I try to learn something new every year. So, you know, in the last 3 years, my activities have been, I learned to surf. So I went to Goa in India, and then I went to Maui in Hawaii. And then I surfed in Diani. I've learned to dance salsa as well. And this year, I got my certifications in addiction counseling. I don't know what I'm going to do next year yet. I haven't figured it out, but it's going to be something cool. Yeah, I was thinking about learning to fly a helicopter maybe. I don't know, something. But so I try to do something new. The other thing I do is I try to help people in their active addiction into a space of recovery. But I will only open the door. I will not ask you. I will not call you. I'll call you once and offer you my help. And if you don't take it, then, you know, that's on you. You can't force someone to want to get clean. It has to come from them first. And then once it's come from them, you can assist them. But if they're not ready, they're not ready. And I learned that it's a really hard thing to deal with because people will come to me all the time and say, my cousin, my son, my nephew, my dad, my uncle, whatever. And 90% of them are not ready to be helped. So then you're having to explain to the people that love them that there's nothing I can do because they are not ready. And that therein lies a challenge of recovery, I think. Addicts are generally victims. We look at ourselves, oh, poor me. Oh, my life is this. Oh, I need to use because of A, B, C, and D. That's who we are, right? So one thing is stop being a fucking victim, right? Everyone's got shit, right? If I ask you to break down your childhood, there'll be trauma there somewhere, for sure. You can't tell me there isn't. And I'm going to give you an example of what I mean in a moment. So stop being a victim, because I was a victim for 46 years. Now, also, that's the other thing that I've learned. I don't look 50, right? Right? There's no way if I asked you my age, you would say 50. One of the biggest attributes to getting clean is your physical appearance improves so dramatically. When I tell people I'm 50, they're like, you are fucking joking. The other day I had someone tell me they thought I turned 40, and I had a client, Chinese lady, say she thought I was in my late 30s. Okay, I think that's a push, but still, there's no way I look 50. Okay, so your physical appearance changes. But we can't be victims anymore. This is the challenge that you're always gonna have, is turning off the victim mentality means that you have to take responsibility for your own life, right? And I'm telling you now, when I started doing that shit, everything changed. I stayed in my radio job because I was afraid that I wasn't going to get anything else. I left in December last year. Like, it is the best decision I've ever made. And I probably stayed there 3 years too long anyway. But anyway, so that's one thing, the victim mentality. The other thing I've learned is someone will only get clean when they're ready, and you can't force it, which we've discussed. The last thing, which I have tattooed to my ribs, is we only keep what we have by giving it away. It's a recovery quote. I can only keep my sobriety and my recovery by helping other people in their sobriety and their recovery. And that is the beautiful benefit of recovery. And it's the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, is that we are now willing and ready to carry the message forward to other suffering addicts. I might have gotten the wording wrong, but that's a general message. So I try to be of service to other addicts as much as I can. And that keeps me in my recovery. Because every time I talk to an addict who needs help, I'm reminded of who I am, you know? And we need to be reminded. It's important. Because when we forget, that's why, if you go to an AA or an NA meeting, I still introduce myself. 7 years in recovery down the road. When I'm in a meeting, I say, my name is Fareed, and I'm a drug addict, and I'm an alcoholic. And some of my family and friends are like, but how long do you have to say that for? And I say, for the rest of my fucking life. Because I will be a drug addict and an alcoholic until the day I die. You don't lose the disease, you manage it. The disease of addiction stays with you for the rest of your life. Because the second you forget, or the second you stop acknowledging it, you'll be right back in it.
I hope you're enjoying Fareed's story so far. At this point, he dives into something that I can totally relate with. The day he decided to quit his radio presenter job.
I drove to Capital FM, moved from Londra House to Two Rivers. I will call it out now because I have nothing to hide. They hired an MD who was absolutely useless at his job. I'm not going to say his name because I don't want to be sued. And there was a lot of different variable factors. I was getting busier with some other work as well. And I was kind of not putting as much focus on other things as I could. I was with my Rena, who is my partner, one night at home. And I said, I really don't want to do this radio job anymore. And she said, then don't. It's the first time everyone else was like, no, you work at Capital, you should stay. I was like, so it is that simple, right? Like, I don't have to do it. So I said to myself, we'd moved from Londra House to Two Rivers, and I said to myself as I was driving in, I lived in Lavington then, and I was driving to Two Rivers in the morning at 5:15, 5:20 with my co-host because she lived close to me, so I'd pick her up and we'd go. It was sunny side up. And I in my mind, I said, I don't want to do this anymore. And if I feel this way at 10 o'clock when the show's over, I'm going to hand in my resignation, which I'd written the night before. I didn't do it. This was on the last day towards the end of November. No, sorry, towards the end of October. And then on November 1st, I went home and I spoke to my partner again. And she said, have the same conversation with yourself on the way in tomorrow. And at 10 o'clock, if you feel the same way, do it. So I did. Went in, drove in. Had a great show. November 1st, 10 o'clock. Went to my MD's office. No, not even to my MD because we didn't even speak. To the HR guy's office. And gave him the letter. And they thought it was a joke or that I was going to backtrack because I've done that in the past. And 1st of December, I walked into my MD's office on a Friday at 10 and said, a month later, see you later. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, I'm done. And to be honest with you, best decision on wood I've made in a very long time career-wise. And what's opened up for me since then has just been incredible, So many opportunities, so many beautiful things, not just work-related, everything has just opened up. My relationships are better with people. I feel more alive. Yeah, it was just, I just didn't want to do it anymore. That was it. I felt like, okay, I've done everything I needed to do in radio and this market has been done. What next height am I going to reach in radio? I'm not. It's over. And I'm a creative director by passion, and that's what I wanted to focus on. And I had a little agency called OTB, we still have it, Outside the Box Creatives, which has gotten busier. And then I was offered this incredible job 5 months ago from this company in New York to be their creative director for Africa. So in less than a year, I'm where I should be, career-wise, which is incredible. Opportunities, keep coming. And it's not smooth. There are ups and downs. I'm not saying that. And please, hey, one of the other things to all people who are thinking of getting off alcohol and drugs and trying to get into recovery, life doesn't just get better. Because let me tell you one thing I learned in my early recovery: if you owe the bank money and you get clean and sober, they don't give a fuck. If KRA is chasing you for tax bills of 5 million or 10 million or 20 million and you tell them, I just came out of rehab, they don't care. So your problems will not disappear. It's the management of those problems. Every single person has problems. Don't sit there, and this is where the victim comes in. Poor me. I'm the only one who's going through a heartbreak. I'm the only one who's got debts. I'm the only one who's had their car repossessed. I'm the only one whose family doesn't speak to them. I'm the only one who can't afford to go on holiday with my friends. Fuck you. You don't think I've been in that situation? People look at me from the outside now and think, that's the perfect life. It's not. I still struggle with things all the time. But my management of the situation is so much better. I'll give you an example. This morning I had a very shitty interaction with a supplier from work whose work was used, but the client hadn't paid for it. I didn't panic. I said, I'm going to share your number with the client. I'm going to share the client's number with you. And this supplier said to me, I'm just going to go legal. I said, hey, do your thing, my friend. If you want to go to a lawyer, go to a lawyer. There's nothing I can do. I can't control the way you think or what you do. But it's the management. And when you find this bliss, I almost don't want to use this term, but I'm going to use it because it's when you find this spiritual alignment, which is from your crown chakra all the way to your root chakra, this beautiful alignment through all your chakras where you are grounded and present, like we are in this conversation now. The other stuff is just periphery bullshit, and you will deal with it. And if you don't deal with it, the world's not going to end, and you're not going to die. Or you might die, I don't know. Maybe that's the plan that the universe has for you. But, Bill Burr, I don't know if you're a fan of him. He's a comedian from New York, I think. And there's this Instagram thing, this thing that keeps popping up on my Instagram feed, and I guess it's my algorithm, where he's talking and he says, you're going to be fine. And if you're not going to be fine, isn't it better to think you're going to be fine anyway? Right? Because we sit here and worry about shit that we can't control anyway. So what I love about the AA program is the Serenity Prayer, which I've known the Serenity Prayer since I was a child. I went to Catholic school. I know the Serenity Prayer. God give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I've heard that prayer for 47 years. I only understood what it meant 3 or 4 years ago. Give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, right? I could sit here now and say, I want my ex-girlfriend back. Maybe she doesn't want to come back to me. This is hypothetical, obviously. So I can't control that. I can't change that, right? The courage to change the things I can. What I can do is make sure the next person I'm with, I treat them with respect, dignity, and love, right? Because I can change that. And the wisdom to know the difference. I can't control this, but I can control this. That is that's a mantra for life. But the problem with every human being is we want to control the outcome of everything. And that is just not a possibility. So Bill Burr is saying, why are you worried about it anyway? You're not going to control it, right? If KRA sends me, if I get an email right now, KRA says, we're auditing your company. Okay, well, I can't call KRA and beg them not to come. But I can call my accountant and say, let's have all our books in order by Tuesday next week. I'll sit with you the whole day on Monday, so when they come on Wednesday, we're prepared for them. That's what I can control. Now, I don't know. I can't control the outcome of that audit anyway, right? I can't. There's no way. They might come in and say, no, you're fucked. You owe us 10 million shillings. But that's not in my control. What's in my control? I could come up with a payment plan if it's a legit figure, and say, okay, give me 5 years and I'll pay you 100,000 shillings a year, whatever. I don't know if that will come up to 10 million, whatever. So as addicts, there are two things we do very well. We portray ourselves as the victim. I drink because, I use because. Oh, my father used to beat my mother. Oh, I was neglected as a child. Yeah, cool, man. You think that fucking kid who's sniffing glue and asking you for 20 bob for chips on the side of the road is not more traumatized than you and me put together? Of course he is. Right? Or the great stories you hear of street kids that are now CEOs. Those people woke up one morning and said, fuck this, I'm not doing this anymore. Right? Could learn a thing or two from those people. The other thing we do as addicts is control. We want to control everyone else because we have lost control of ourselves. So I would control my wife, control my mother, control. But all you're doing is making people run away from you. When my wife left me with my kids when I was in treatment, I had my sponsor in AA. That's like a mentor in the program. Beautiful man, older guy, lovely, lovely guy. I was complaining the first two years, of this whole 6-year journey. And he said, but you lied, you cheated, and you were dishonest for 10 years in your marriage. And she only did one thing. I was like, when you put it like that, actually, I was pretty much the oppressor in all of this. I mean, these are hard truths, my friend. But learn to accept the hard truths. That the easiest thing to do when we're faced with hard truths is to numb. I don't have that option anymore. If you tell me today, we leave here, and then you call me tomorrow, I call you in a week and say, hey, is the podcast up? And you say, actually, Fareed, no, it was shit. And you can quantify it by telling me why. Now, all Fareed would have been like, fuck this guy, I'm going to drink. And then everything seems fine until the next day when I'm hungover and it's even worse. Now I've got to sit here and say, okay, you've given me the reasons why the podcast isn't great. Maybe I talk too much. Maybe I swore too much. Maybe my story doesn't sound authentic, whatever it is. So I can call you in a week later and say, okay, look, I'd like to have another shot at it. And you might say yes or no. I have to be ready for you to also say, I don't have time now. And actually, we don't even think you'd be a good guest anyway. You might be like that. You might say that. So how do I deal with that without numbing it? Well, I sit there and say, okay, the next time I'm invited so I'll say, can you send me a copy of what we did? I want to listen to it. So I listen and I look at your notes and I say, shit, he was right, man. This wasn't authentic. I did swear too much. I rambled on about nothing. So it's probably not the last podcast I've been invited for. So how am I going to improve for the next time I'm invited to do a podcast? And that's life. That little scenario I've given you, that is life. Relationships, work, women, men, family, that's life. You will fuck up a million times. I fuck up all the time when I'm sober. In the beginning stage, I used to be like, but I'm sober. Why are people saying we all fuck up? Alcohol is not the reason we fucked up. We're the reason we fucked up. The question is, how do you make sure that if you did it this way this time and it didn't work, whatever it is, whether it's work, relationships, whatever, then how next time are you going to do it so it is beneficial to you and to everyone else? The last piece of advice I'd give every other addict is be honest and authentic to yourself. Your addiction and your recovery is not anyone else's problem. Don't get clean because your wife wants you to get clean. Don't get clean because mom is saying you should get clean. Don't get clean because your son is saying you should get clean. Get clean because you want to get clean. That's why I say when I open the door to an addict who needs help, I open it once. Now I leave. It's up to you. And you could be 5 years down the road and you can call me and say, I need help. The second you say, I need help, I will be there to help. Authenticity and honesty to yourself is the cornerstone of life. Once you do that, everything else in terms of being honest and authentic with other people is so fucking easy. And I remember I was emceeing a very big wedding, 2019, I think. And I did an amazing job. I was sober at the time, been a year out of rehab. And at the end of the wedding, I looked over and there was a bar with all this beautiful single malt whiskey. And I thought to myself, fuck yeah, man. Well done, Fareed. Go and have a drink. Stupid addict mentality. But between me and the bar was this guy holding his arms out to give me a hug. And it was my sponsor from AA. So I said to him, wow, man. I said, you saved my life. I was headed to that bar to have a drink and no one would have known. And he said, but you would have known. That's what I mean. I was still not ready to be honest and authentic with myself because I was still saying, if I do this, no one will know. But he said, but you, Fareed, you would have known. And you're the most important person in that equation. That's beautiful advice.
So perhaps you're battling addiction and you would love resources that can help you. Or maybe you know somebody who you could share these resources with. What's really awesome is Fareed shared some amazing resources.
Alcoholics, Narcotics Anonymous, Sex and Love Anonymous, Gambling Anonymous, they're all available here. Physical meetings and online, and there's no cost. So that's great. If I can share with you the links to some of these online ones and also locations of my personal favorite is Maguga Primary School, Brookside Grove, I think. Yeah, Brookside Grove. Thursday evenings there's a Narcotics Anonymous meeting at 6:30. That's my favorite meeting. But there are 15, 20 meetings a week in Nairobi. There are a number of awesome platforms online that you can watch videos of people like myself who talk about their recovery journey. And then, of course, I'm open for counseling and I do all my counseling for free. I don't charge for counseling because I had the support financially and the love and the care from my family and friends when I went away for treatment that I physically cannot charge for my counseling. So I will not charge. We are opening up an addiction treatment center, an outpatient center, which will serve a lower demographic, economic demographic as well. Not free, because we obviously will have bills to pay, but it will be manageable, and there will be stipends and subsidies for people who don't have any money. We'll never turn anyone away. Let me put it that way. Live life, man. I lived in such a colorless world for so many years, and I get so emotional when I talk about this, you know. It's just sort of going without stopping, you know what I mean? And looking and seeing, you know, just the beauty around you. Live life, you know, like just try, you know. And if you are suffering from addiction, if you are struggling with any kind of substance abuse or addiction issues, you know, just speak to somebody, you know, tell them how you're feeling. You know, it's very hard when you tell someone it's a disease, and oftentimes they're like, no, it's not. You just like to drink or you like to use drugs. It is a disease to a degree. I'm sort of split 50-50 on it, to be honest. And you're an addict because you're trying to cover something that is not possible without the substances. And it's not your fault. Just get help.
Catch more African stories in the next episode of Legally Clueless. I hope you enjoyed Fareed's story. There's so many gems that he dropped. Honestly, that thing of the victim mentality, it stretches beyond addiction. I think for a good part of my life, I carried myself as a victim. One thing about the victim mentality that really was uncomfortable, but I didn't know it was coming from myself, is the helplessness that comes with the victim mentality. That mentality makes you feel like somebody else has to come and save you. Yet the good news is nobody's coming and you can save yourself. It's like fantastic news. Trust me. Because it just means you're this powerful, very able being who's able to carry yourself through storms. Nobody else has to come in and do that for you. You've got all you need. And when he was talking about the victim mentality, I just remembered having to wake myself up from that. I also really loved when he talked about addiction being a symptom of trauma. And especially in African families, we look at our family members who are battling addiction as an inconvenience, as they're choosing this lifestyle and they're being reckless, when in essence, first, there's the disease aspect, but also there's the underlying trauma aspect. Yeah, I don't know. When we look at it from that lens, obviously not everybody has the grace, and that's okay. But when we look at it from that lens, it makes us more empathetic. We can then start figuring out how can we be a better support system when we have the grace to, because it's also pretty draining, right? Of course, I loved when he talks about leaving his radio job. It's so funny how, and I don't know if it only happens in radio. If you work in a different industry, maybe you can share if you've left that industry. But there's a feeling of smallness that management makes you think of yourself. And they do this over years, just using these words. And so even when you're handing in that resignation, there's this overwhelming fear that you will amount to nothing, you know? And I remember we had a manager at the station I worked at who actually used to say, "You are nothing without this microphone." And if you hear that often enough, you internalize it. And when you're leaving, you start to think, I am nothing. And then it surprises you. You're like, hang on. No, I ain't, you know? And yeah, so we really, toxic spaces, be it workspaces or even relationships, you know, can make you really believe that you are small when in essence, you have such a big life ahead of you. This job is just one little chapter. One little chapter. Anyway, I want to know what you connected with in Fareed's story. Please share that with me in the comments wherever you're listening to this on. And we are working our way back to work. So your episodes of Midweek Teas and Ask a Therapist will be back next week. Thank you so much for listening to this episode to the very end. And once again, I will remind you that I'm wishing you this year solitude and courage so that you can work your way to calming clarity. That's it for this episode of Legally Clueless. You can share this podcast with your friends. You can keep it for yourself. I'm not judging. Just make sure you're here next week for the next episode.